Welcome to the O'Neill Perspective, Politics, Power, and Policy, where we break down the latest in politics, dive deep into forces shaping our society, and uncover the policies that will make it all happen. Your host, Curtis O'Neill, is here to educate, enlighten, and entertain as we explore the world of politics with clarity and insight. Whether you're a political junkie or just trying to be informed, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the O'Neill Perspective, where we talk power, we talk policy, and we talk politics. I am your host today, Curtis O'Neill, and on this show, we don't live off the headlines. We don't live off of talking points. In fact, what we do is discuss truth. We do discuss context, and we do discuss strategy. We know here that truth builds power, and power builds options. Now, in today's episode, and I want to say this before we get started, I'm glad to be back. I've been gone for a few months, so happy to be back. So with regards to today's episode, we're going to stretch some people a bit. Because we know that's how growth happens, right? And so with today's episode, I'm going to hit you with one of the most uncomfortable facts in early American history, because the truth doesn't ask for permission that we know. So in 1655, we know that there was a free black man that sued to claim another black man as a servant for life. Yes, I said it. In 1655, that's about over 400 years ago, a free black man sued to claim another black man as a servant for life. And this particular case, of course, gives rise to chattel slavery in the United States, in the early colonies, and soon to be the United States. It wasn't for a term. It wasn't for a contract, but in fact, it was for life. And the court, the court agreed to this. And of course, this happened in Northampton County, Virginia. Now, the court said that a white neighbor by the name of Robert Parker had most unjustly kept John Casser, who was another black man, from Anthony Johnson, who was another black man. And they called Johnson his master and ordered Castor to be returned back to Johnson. And we'll get into discuss the context of the case a little bit later. But I do want to say this before we even get started. This episode is not here to disrespect black suffering. Make that very clear. It's not to disrespect black suffering, nor is it to excuse slavery overall, but it's here to expose something bigger. And that's how the law helped build a system, and how systems can recruit anybody when money and power are on the table. As a matter of fact, I heard a wise man say, and this is true, I know it to be a fact, that anytime that money is involved, a system can become an abomination. So for example, think about our medical system and how the insurance industry has played a role in that, and how it has taken something that was meant to be good, that is meant to help all, and now it's become this money-making machine. And so that has created a lot of issues in the American healthcare system. So that being said, I want to talk about what it is here, what we're here to do today. We're here to expose something bigger. We're here to talk about how the law helped build a system and how systems can recruit anybody, again, when there's money and power on the table, as I previously said. So we know that some people only know history. Some of those, what we call, stories, Some of those what I like to think of as sometimes bedtime stories, where we're talking about good guys and we're talking about bad guys, where one group is all innocent and then you have one group that is all evil. But real history is a systems manual. And I like to think of it as a systems manual because when you know your history, you know the past, and you know what you don't want to have repeated. And so here's the lesson. African Americans are not a bad luck project. We know racism is real, yes, but racism is not your destiny unless you hand the person the keys to your mind, right? We have to stop allowing people to live rent-free in our heads. And slavery, oppression has shown up across history in different forms and in different places. And knowing that doesn't reduce what has happened to us. In fact, what it does do for us, it gives us a bigger lens and a stronger strategy. And also, it also just helps us to understand that we're not here to win the oppression Olympics. We're not here to say, hey, look, we had it better than this group and this group had it worse than us. That does nothing for us. It does nothing for us at all. And so what we are here to do is talk about how we can win the future. And we also know that, in basic human terms, right, and looking at the context of this particular case, we know that Virginia was a society at the time that was violent. It was hungry for a labor force. Its chief, industry at the time was tobacco. It was really focused on acquiring land, and in attempts to acquire land, you can plant tobacco, which of course was going to bring in profit. And people were being worked to death. Some for a term, some for life, and a lot of times that line was somewhat blurry, right? There were people that were coming over, and in an effort to provide their debt or pay off the debt, they were required to work for another person for a number of years. And if the people brought over their families, then of course there was more debt to be had, and of course more time in an effort to pay that off. So here comes John Kasser. Believed that Kasser, being a black man, believed that his time was up. He leaves Anthony Johnson, who was another black man at the time, had some indentured ownership over him. He, of course, we know Anthony Johnson was a free black landowner with property and standing in Virginia. Kasser goes to Robert Parker, who is basically a white man that was the neighbor of Anthony Johnson. And Kasser basically says to Robert Parker, hey, look, man, I want to work, but I want it on fair terms, and I want my freedom to be respected. Parker lets him stay at his house. And, and again, we can conclude that maybe Parker believed Kasser, right? Or maybe Parker wanted, the labor too. Or maybe Parker wanted both, right? He probably saw Johnson as his competition, and what better way can I, compete with this guy by taking his indentured servant? So Anthony Johnson sees it as someone is taking what belongs to him, and he does what any particular powerful person at that time would do. He uses the system, and he goes to court. And the court at this point says they don't look at Kasser like a man with a future. The court basically treats Kasser like a problem to be returned back to Johnson. And that's one of the early moments where you can see the machinery start to turn and the wheels start to turn in early American society, especially with regards to chattel slavery. The law, at that time, the law just didn't reflect the system. It basically helped to build it. And so that's an important piece there. Now, what's interesting as we start to engage in this whole conversation about how the law built the system, I don't want this to get into too much into the weeds of a legal discussion. I want to sort of keep it high level, at the same time try to make it educational and enlightening for the audience. But so I'm not going to bury you in a bunch of legal language, but I will say we do need to understand something simple. And that is, systems tend to get dangerous when law starts doing three things. And I want you to pay attention to this. The systems get dangerous because I see it play out even now. Even now, systems are playing out. Number one, when we start to label people. Back then, in the early 1600s, it was servant, slave, and free. Today, we're labeling people, right? We like to do a lot of labeling, right? Especially around politics. Conservative, liberal, moderate, right? Independent, Democrat, Republican, right? A protected class, minority, majority, immigrant, heterosexual, transsexual, bisexual, all of these particular labels, right, that tend to play out, right? Labels sound simple, but labels decide your life, right? Number two, it starts to when we start to enforcing those labels, not with morality, but with force, when we start to say that these people belong over here because they're this, these people belong over here because they're labeled this and that, we tend to see certain things play out. For example, and I would just sort of say it like this, African Americans are historically Democrats. And so anytime you have an African American that step outside of being a Democrat and they said they're Republican, there's a problem, right? There's an issue, right? They expect certain people to vote certain ways based on what we like to say as identity politics. That can be a problem. And so court orders, then the court starts to order certain things, and then they start to say, hey, based on this, then we're going to provide this kind of punishment, right? That's dangerous. Number three is, I think it's important that when we start making labels permanent, not just for you, but those labels also become an issue for our children and our family. We have to be mindful of that. And so once the law makes things permanent, then the system becomes a machine that tends to print wealth for some, and of course, pain for others. So when people say, how did slavery become what it became? It wasn't magic. It wasn't something that started overnight. It was steps. It was decisions. It was policies. It was enforcement. And that's how law creates a system. Now, here's the complicated part. And I want to talk about this with regards to the narrative between Anthony Johnson, John Kasser, and Robert Parker. You see, as we know, Anthony Johnson was black. John Kasser was black. And Johnson used the courts to pull Kasser back onto his plantation. So what does that mean? It means that systems can recruit participants from anywhere when power is rewarded. It means being connected to oppression doesn't automatically make a person righteous. And it means that we should stop telling bedtime stories to ourselves about some of this stuff, right? But we need to be clear that this doesn't erase any particular type of racial brutality in terms of what happened with regards to American chattel slavery. But in fact, it does show that the system is built piece by piece and brick by brick. It shows how wealth can tempt the human heart and how the law can turn temptation into policy, right? We know that money corrupts and power corrupts. We know that and we get that. So now let's take a little time to sort of widen the lens a bit. Slavery, as we know, has existed across history in different forms, in different places, in different groups. We know that indigenous people were enslaved and part of colonial America. We know that Africans were enslaved under multiple empires and systems. Heck, Europeans, Asians were enslaved in different regions too. No particular ethnic group or race was left out of the slave trade. And I want to make that very clear because I don't want others to think, oh, a particular group was bad luck. No, we heard about in the Bible, the children of Israel, how they were slaves under the Egyptian empire at the time, right? No particular group was left out of slavery at that particular time. So one of the things that I do want to say is that this is not to minimize what has happened to African American people, but I do want it to show that oppression is human-made, right? And anything human-made can be studied, and anything that is human-made, fortunately, can be defeated. So, as we know, some of us have been trained to live in this, unfortunately, some of us have been trained to live in this, what I like to call this permanent victim class. Like we're doomed. Like we're some bad luck project. No, not at all. That is absolutely not the case. Yeah, we know racism exists, but the most dangerous barrier is the one I talked a little bit about earlier, letting people live in your head rent free. The most dangerous barrier is the one that convinces you that your skin is your ceiling. Because once you believe that, guess what you stop to do? You stop building. You stop building your skills. You stop networking. You stop trying to accomplish business and building business. You don't go after capital. There's no discipline. There is no faith. And you start building excuses. And guess what? Excuses don't free anybody. Your skin may affect what you encounter, yes, but it does not dictate who you become unless you let it. And again, I think some of us allow people to live rent-free in our heads, and we allow these talking heads, especially mainstream media today, will make us think that we have there's a racist counterpart for every minority person in the country. When I was younger, I used to hear numerous affirmations that were given. Jesse Jackson, who has recently passed, rest Jesse Jackson in peace. But we used to say, I am somebody. And these were affirmations that were made, and a lot of young African American children would say these things. Those affirmations are important. James Brown said something, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. It's about doing anything that you set out to do. Now we have naysayers, many people, many African American people that have done quite well, constantly talk about racism and communicate this message to a lot of minority young people. And many young people are buying it, thinking that, oh, no matter what I do, I am never going to accomplish much because racism and white supremacy is going to hold me back. No. I want to say we have to drop that victimhood mentality, and that has got to go. So here's the practical takeaways. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this. So here are your takeaways. Number 1, learn how systems work. 2, learn how rules shape outcomes. 3, build paper power. That means we need to learn how contracts and credit and ownership and documentation, why they're so important. Number 4, build skill power. Become undeniable. And what I like to liken that to Booker T. Washington. He talked about building skills and creating skills, something that you can attribute to society and people start to depend on. Number 5, build network power, relationships, and multiply those success. In other words, make it reciprocal. You pour into people, guess what? People are going to pour into you. We're talking positive things, not the negative things. Number 6, build mind power. Stop letting other people write your identity script. Stop allowing other people to play identity politics with you. And stop allowing people to live rent-free in your head, listening to some of these talking heads on social media and some of these celebrities talk about certain things. Know what fights to get into and know what fights to leave alone. So, in closing, I want to be able to say this to you all and to my audience and to my listeners today, that we know truth builds power. And we know that this episode wasn't about the blame game. It was about clarity. And clarity is freedom. And that Anthony Johnson and John Kasser case complicates the narrative, right? Yes. And when a story complicates the narrative, it forces you to grow, as we talked about earlier at the top of the conversation. And here's the thing. We're not here to win the oppression Olympics. We're here to win freedom of mind, freedom of income, freedom of legacy, and freedom of destiny. You see, truth builds power and power builds options. That's what we want. I say it all the time. I like the option of going to buy a Mercedes, and not necessarily buying a Mercedes, but the option that if I wanted to, I could do so. So again, one of the things that we want is we want to have the options to build our own power, to create our own legacy, to move our families, ourselves, and community forward. So again, I hope you enjoyed this episode from the O'Neill Perspective. Stay tuned for other episodes. Again, my name is Curtis O'Neill, and I'm always pleased to educate, entertain, and enlighten. And I hope that you got something from this episode of the O'Neill Perspective. Stay tuned for other episodes in the near future. Thanks so much.
That's all for today's episode of The O'Neill Perspective, Politics, Power, and Policy. I hope you learned something new, got inspired, and maybe had a little fun along the way. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us next time for more thought-provoking conversations. Until then, stay informed and stay empowered.